Yeah, today's story. And I told the story yesterday at the end of davening. I want to say it here and add detail or another part of the story. I'm going to find it where I sent it to myself. Gewaltig geschrieben. Yes, please. Oh, Rachmanis. No. Okay, here's a story. A story connected with Yud Gimel Tammuz, a story with the Chassidic Rebbe, and you'll see the connection further. So the story is, this is a story that's related by directly. So there's an incredible Rabbi Meir Avtzner lived in Detroit, who he heard the story from Arav Peretz Chaim himself, to whom the story happened, and he writes it in his book that he wrote of Meir Avtzner. This is the grandfather of the Avtzner family, the great grandfather, and they write where he heard the story. So the Peretz Chaim relates as follows: at the age of 15, the Chassidic Rebbe was appointed secretary of the Rebbe Rashab. That meant that anybody and everyone, even veteran rabbis and prestigious leaders who came to discuss communal matters with Rebbe Rashab, would discuss them with his son, the Chassidic Rebbe. So the famous Chassid of Peretz Chaim, the big Ravats, came to Lubavitch, and he was the revered Rav of a city called Kriv Kafke, a town on the Dnieper River opposite Kremenchuk. Following the protocol, he gave a report and discussed certain things with the Chassidic Rebbe, the Rebbe's son. And while he's talking, the future Rebbe, 15 years old, is taking a coin and flipping it and catching it, relaunching it repeatedly, playing with a coin. Rav Chaim, the parrot, was taken aback, thinking to himself that he's disrespecting me. He's a Rav of a big kehillah. This is how he's paying attention and is in serious discussion, as well as who he's talking to. But out of respect, he continued the discussion, ignoring what the figure was doing. At one point, the figure misses the coin and it falls to the floor. So Rav Chaim considers, should I pick it up? On the one hand, he thinks to himself, it's below my dignity to pick up the coin for this young fella. He's a teenager. On the other hand, it's the Rebbe's son. And so he bends down to retrieve the coin. The second he bends down, a gun shot rings out. A bullet flew through the window, missing his head by inches. Had he been standing, would have shot him in the back of the head. Who shot the bullet? So the detail here, this is 1916, 1917. This is the Russian Revolution. Before the Bolsheviks took control and put down all the vying factions, they're all fighting for control. And one of them, the revolutionary group, was called the SR Vatzer group. You know what that means in Russian. And they were after the Chassidic Rebbe, 15 years old, because they were all anti-religious, and he was a religious, they saw an inspirational religious figure. They wanted him eliminated. And they wore the similar hats, and they came to Lubavitch, and through the window they shot, thinking they were killing the Chassidic Rebbe. Of course, they shot and ran away. So, end of story. Peretz Chaim relates the story. He said, of course, he was very ashamed, and he realized, in his words, you don't play around with the Rebbe's son, and I was totally wrong in my misgivings about him and his actions. He Pasha saved his life with his casual playing with a coin. So in this context, I don't know if these guys that shot were Jewish or not, but I'm going to read to you something that the Rebbe said, Yud Beis Tammuz, word for word, Yud Beis Tammuz Tafshin Chafei. It's very possible they were, because passionate Jews were the forefront of all of these movements to change the world and bring utopia, including and especially communism. So the Rebbe says, this is from 1969, Yud Beis Tammuz. The Rebbe quotes you from a letter from the Chassidic Rebbe. quote, everybody knows, and it's very clear, as those who remember what happened then, that the arrest and the exile came as a result of the libel, the alshana, the libel, the accusations from our brethren, haters, and those who seek revenge against Jews observant of Shemri das Moishe v'Yisrael, those who keep our faith of Moishe v'Yisrael against the state and the government. End of quote of a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe said, meaning, this is 1969. This is not OCS you'll hear from the Rebbe in the later years. This is 1969. They're still the early years a little bit. The arrest was not done by the government itself, but by a certain division who called themselves not Goyim. And not only do they not call themselves just people, a member of a party, but they call themselves Yevraskaya Sektia, which means the Jewish division of the Communist Party. Why do they call themselves this? The Jewish, they themselves called them that. They were saying they're Jews, but what is their Judaism? What's to not allow Torah study and Kiyum Mitzvahs and the children and the education of children and faith? That's Judaism. Now he's saying that's the liberal. It's the same thing today. There's in the name of liberal Judaism, the war against godliness. Today it's just whatever, it's amaratzis, and that's what happened. Now the Rebbe adds, and this is what happened to the end of the day. End of the day, they were purged. They were all Achman Litzlan, killed by Stalin. And the Rebbe says it's forbidden chas v'sholom to have a feeling opposite of pain when a Jew is lost, is destroyed. But we see that this is midah keneged midah. At the end of the day, they got their psak from the government, from the Russian government, and the government told them, Stalin, why is purging them? He said, because you're Jews, and you conduct yourself like you have your own agenda, you're independent. Because they were Jewish, that's they were killed. That was kind of saying, because they were using the Chas v'Shalom, their Jewishness, to fight Yiddishkeit, it was this very reason, their Jewishness, that they were Rahman and Son eliminated. So it's an incredible story here, but the end is of course Yud Beis Tammuz and his vindication of Frierdiker Rebbe and his release by the very same authorities that imprisoned him. So that's all the process of his hapcha, that's Pashas Bolok, the curses become blessings, etc. Now I'm stressing that this is Tavshin Chavtes, because it's not the early years, not so much the language, the later years. We're now ready for the hapcha and the turning around, and it's Tinakish and Nishbu, and people are just doing because out of ignorance or don't really understand. It's not the war that it used to be. I mention this also because I don't know if the story that I told you before was they were Jews that shot, but I know there was another story, maybe it was the same one. If I'm not mistaken, it was, could even been the early Zionists that also sought physically to eliminate the Frierdiker Rebbe. Just gives you an idea of how deep the Milchama was and how painful the Milchama was, that the real war came from our fellow Jew. Therefore, how sweet the victory is when all of this is transformed and darkness turned into light. Have a wonderful day, and Be'ez Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow.